Ayn Rand was an unusual human being. And to understand her, you really have to read her. It takes a certain amount of immersion, a power of surrendering yourself to a book to read her from cover to cover. I liked The Fountainhead. But what made me a reader very young, I think, was my father took me to film Battle of Britain, and I happened to have that book on my shelf, so I read it from cover to cover. I was probably 8 years old, nine, maybe eight, about the age where my father also put me off by not allowing me to read his textbook, which I probably would have appreciated more than he realized. I'm not saying that the Battle of Britain was the best book in the world. It wasn't. It was a little bit technical for my taste. But although I didn't find it gripping, I did find it important. So I read it from cover to cover. And when I put it down, I said, wow, I just read my first book from cover to cover. And the power of immersion is something you just take things in. You don't make notes, and you're not a scholar yet. You're not, the way people read Tolkien. You just read. That's all. Some things are memorable. Some things come and go in your mind. You get a picture in your mind about it. Um, so I covered some territory when it came to reading. I couldn't even list all of the books. Sometimes something comes to mind. I almost surprise myself that I remember something from it that seems noteworthy or important. Ayn Rand, I knew something about that I didn't think the young Republicans at Pitt in the rise of Reagan knew. I had been on a Philadelphia subway and I picked up a newspaper that was on the ground. I think I saw William F. Buckley, the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'll read this article while I'm going up to Elkins Park or whatever I might have happened to be doing. And the first line was Ayn Rand is dead and so is her philosophy. Well, the information that Miss Rand had died was, of course, jarring to me because I approved of her presence on this stage, let's put it that way. And the fact that Buckley didn't like her and explained his reasons was also a little bit jarring because she did quite a lot of damage to the people who stood for right and wrong that opposed William F. Buckley's manias for warfare and military mayhem and apologies for American imperialism, so much so that she got a reputation of being this right wing horror. I didn't see her. I saw that. She wasn't that unusual. Buckley was the same way. And to see him taking her on about the welfare state, for example, seemed to me to be strange enough that when there was a rally at the Pitt Student Union, I went up to the microphone after Mr. Buckley had spoken and said, would you please tell us about your differences with Ayn Rand? And there was quite a hush because many of the young Republicans, like I, had sort of assumed, vainly associated them with one another. Reagan charmers. And he lost not a beat. He said, certainly, I'll be glad to explain. And he took us on quite a journey similar to the article that I had read. Ayn Rand's virtue of selfishness, Mr. Sachs, is predicated on certain things that are actually fairly admirable. She believes in, which we would, I think, agree with, if they were taken out of context and not um, platformed as bumper stickers from the mind of Ayn Rand. For example, she didn't believe that people who didn't respect others had any self respect. And for their lack of self respect, they went around disrespecting others. And she didn't like that. Neither do I, and neither do you. So maybe you'll say I'm cherry picking, that the sum total of her philosophy is important. Let me give you some examples of what she said about things that people misconstrue her for being wrong about when she was right. A lot of hardcore American right wing sci fi nutters got all up in arms and we're doing like this here and that there about the hostages who went on television in North Korea and denounced America. Ayn Rand said no. Everybody knows they're being pressured, being threatened at bayonet points, that they were brainwashed. Show some sympathy and stop being absurd. She had a sense of proportion and a certain amount of judgment. And this was a woman who created a hero in her worst book, the legendary slop, Atlas Shrugged, which, by the way, is very important to understanding Lenin's Houdini. Very, very important. Who basically was ready to go to his death rather than give information to the enemy. Of course, NASA's brainwave from BBC got the upper hand. Roger Waters, oh, ho, ho, ho. But those were the kind of people she didn't like. And she didn't, she said, have some sense. These poor men were taken prisoner, and everybody knows they're being put up to it. Just quiet your own stupidities. To the right wing fascists. That was very admirable, noble gesture on her part. Another is one that gets me into trouble with the David Bowie kooks. She hated child slavery, knocking a child in the head and making him subservient like a slave, deafening a child and putting a neurotrauma in her. It was called Comprachios, and she did a dissertation in the Objectivist newsletter. Absolutely horrible, she thought that phenomenon was. Absolutely horrible. Well, I sympathize with people who find certain aspects like her climate and ecology stuff is just, it's brain damage. Her best character had nothing, just loved buildings for light and air, he said. He wouldn't have had gone to a tea party with the woman who created him. Howard Rourke would have had no time for Ayn Rand and her stuff about ecology and so on. It's just, it's synchronized to the immorality of the rapacious greed that she thought was so charming, and people dislike her for. And it should be pointed out that Buckley didn't dislike her for that. He disliked her for the problem, believing that people who were truly poor and truly needy were so because of their lack of self-respect. And I happen to agree with him that such people are victims of circumstances. But here's the point that she missed, and I don't remember him going into it. Standards come about because of peer review. People look, for example, water quality, who are talented at water quality, and report back to the public, who review it, peer review it, and report to the public, and have people who are armchair readers who critique these things and report back to the public, and the public can stay informed by saying, does it meet the standards or does it not meet the standards? And self respect is knowing that nobody is a specialist in everything. So the government's role is to make sure that the standards are up to standard, that everybody knows what the standards are, and that the standards are established by comprehending authorities in the matter through a process of learning, scientific method, and peer review. The idea that if you don't understand what applies to you, then you are deficient and lack self respect is idiotic. Ayn Rand had insufficient comprehension of standardization processes and peer review processes. It was a defect in her legendary screeds like the virtue of selfishness. It was myopia as a ideology, self-focus. Some of the things she had to say were absolutely true, and it is ingracious. Anytime you create an idol and go, oh, they're always right, and start worshiping them, you create a personality cult. If you really like something, then you get involved in understanding it and show your appreciation by accurately critiquing it. Ayn Rand was so up in arms with her wall of sound that she called intellectual ammunition. That she drowned out criticisms by people who meant well. I don't know how well Buckley meant, but he was sick and tired of her. Just like Noam Chomsky was sick and tired of Bill Buckley. The difference was that Chomsky was gracious about it and Bill Buckley wasn't gracious about it. Ayn Rand had moments of compassion. She had moments of grace. And for that, I appreciated her presence on the scene and was a little bit disappointed in Buckley.